All right, welcome everybody to the Jessi Mendoza Show. It's been a long time coming, but finally we're here. Kind of a fresh restart to this podcast. I'm very excited here to have Guy Evans joining me as my guest, and couldn't be more excited. It's a fresh new start. We had some minor technical difficulties, but hey, he's already coming through with some really great experience, and we'll be chatting quite a bit. Mindfulness, experience, career, strengths. We're going to be kind of jumping a little, but we'll try to stay focused for you and get a few nuggets in there. So, Guy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. So, do you want to give us kind of a general, brief kind of bio and history and what you're up to these days?
Sure. So I'm turning 50 tomorrow. So this is a good time to have a podcast.
Yeah, good reflection time.
We are recording this in the beautiful backyard of my brother here in Wenatchee. And I was born and raised in Chelan, Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Washington in 1994. And then began some wandering days, finally made it back to Chelan and worked in a couple different jobs, and then finally started my first business, which was in videography. So that's where I got some of this experience doing interviews like you're doing. Mm-hmm. That led to a documentary called Broken Limbs, which was aired on PBS in 2004. And after that, I just made a big shift, and that's, looking back on my 50 years, can see several big shifts. So that was one of my big shifts, to go home to our family farm in Chelan. And so I farmed with my dad from 2004 until 2013. And that's when lots of things changed in my life, kind of the literal coming to Jesus moment, and happy to unpack that a little bit. But that was a shift, again, professionally into real estate, which I've been doing since then. And there's been several relationships along that path, which is part of the Jesus story. Happy to say I'm married to a lovely woman as of almost a year now. So my third marriage, and have 3 lovely kids. 1 is biological and 2 stepkids. And growing into what it's like to have a household full of a mother and 3 daughters and 2 female dogs. So I'm a little outnumbered, but finding my way. So that's kind of the state of things in my world right now. Oh, and I should say, I got my brother some really nice tequila for Christmas.
Yeah.
And I don't drink from New Year's until Easter every year. And so after a hard, Friday, I just thought, hey, what better way to kick this podcast off than to enjoy some nice fine tequila.
And fine it is, for sure. Man, that is definitely up there with some of the finest tequila I've had. Like, I don't need no reaction to it. It's just smooth.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Wow. So there's a lot of ways that we could definitely unpack that quite a bit. So let's maybe go back earlier in your career and how you kind of had that come to Jesus moment, and how you started to become more self-aware of, I need to make some changes. I need to do something different. And only because you graduated in engineering, yet you didn't necessarily go down that route. And maybe I think that resonates with a lot of people. You know, they may have gotten an education or experience in a certain field, but they get a sense that they may want to do something different. How did you come up with making a change?
Yes. Well, I, as I raise 3 daughters right now, would not wish my 20s on them. I had a bit of a delayed adolescence. And so when I graduated from college, imagine just all of the questioning and uncertainty and self-identity issues that sometimes come when you're younger in adolescence. Imagining having those when you're in your mid-20s. And so I often say that the sort of the velocity at which you would address things when you're an adolescent is pretty small, but if you build those up, it's like a rubber band and all that tension. So I graduated from college and had a relationship that didn't end well, and it really just rocked my world, and that launched me out just into a kind of a period of like, who am I and what makes me tick and what do I love in life and how do I find direction? Because I was not at all interested in getting a job, in engineering at the time, even though I'd had a great internship at Microsoft and good grades, and so definitely the opportunities were there. But I've always had this challenge: if my heart doesn't call me to something, there's no way you're going to get me there. I'd rather just sit on the street and just, beg than to just go someplace that I don't feel that sense of curiosity or yearning. And so that was probably the first bit of self-discovery. And I say I wouldn't want my daughters to do that because it wasn't all fun. I mean, I had some fun jobs and all that, but it's easy to get lost along the way when you're just out there on the fringes of your psychology and don't have the support structures of a school or a professional group of people you're working with. And so I had some mental health issues, got depressed a little bit, and but just persevered. I think that's, if I had looked at my 20s and my 30s, that's the thing I got from my family is, you get up every day. We come from agriculture family like your own, and you just put your boots on and you go out and give it your best. It doesn't matter how foul your mind is, you just get up every day and you go out there and give it a good shot. And so that weathered me through quite a few seasons of life, and I'm happy to say the weather patterns are nicer now, so a little more joy and lightness in my life. But for a good stretch there, it was a bit challenging.
And talking about the seasons, let's go into the winters, kind of the darker times for a little bit, and then we'll kind of come out the other side. And what it was a very challenging time for you during those times. What helped you beyond grit to kind of find your own way, even though it may have taken a little bit longer than what you had hoped? How did you find sort of a process so that way you didn't get stuck in that loop or in that process?
Yes. Well, and that's where you just wish, gosh, if I could just tell myself when I was 28 what I know now. There's several stages of that question that I can answer. The first answer that comes is in 1998, a friend of mine introduced me to a book that had come out, I think in 95, called The Artist's Way. And it's been out a long time now, but it's basically a way for people that have creative brains. We all have creative brains, and that was the beauty of this book, is it offered a structure for basically anybody to just get some traction in their life. And it had a practice called morning pages, where it said, hey, Jessi, I want you to get up every day, and the first thing is just to write 3 pages of longhand. This isn't journaling, this is just stream of consciousness, get it on the page. And so I took to that like a fish to water, and it was so helpful for me, because what was upstairs in my head was just a lot of self-recrimination. Just, I wasn't pulling in a salary that perhaps my degree justified. I wasn't on a path that I felt like those around me could, sort of say, yeah, guy's got it going on. I just felt like I was lost. And every day, just putting those negative thoughts onto the paper would get my sort of psychological bank account at least to the black. Like I woke up and I was in the red in terms of negative self-talk, and morning pages got me into the black, and I could go through my day. So that was number one. Number two, I became a practitioner of Buddhism in my late 20s, and that was a rich chapter, about a decade long, and would go periodically on silent retreats for a week. And that really, although I didn't understand why at the time completely, would restore me and just give me, again, a little bit of air to breathe. And so that was number two. Fast forward into the coming to Jesus moment. Wife number two doesn't work out. Things on the farm aren't going great. Here I am, I've got a young daughter, and I'm repeating what I experienced in terms of being the kid of divorced parents. I just, how did I get here? And found Christ, and that's kind of a whole nother subject, but in the context of that, met a very wise mental health counselor who helped me see that some of my challenges are sensitivities to light and noise. So it's not psychology, it's physiology. And he sent me to an occupational therapist, and she said, I want you to bounce on a trampoline for 2 times a day for 5 minutes each with some weights in your arms, and track your stimulus, like how do you feel, overstimulated, understimulated, how are you feeling, for 2 weeks, and come back to me. And it was like a watershed moment. And the nut of it is my limbic brain doesn't process sound and light like most brains, and so it just builds up in there, and it puts me into this fight or flight situation, and kind of makes me all anxious. And this has been happening my whole life, and I didn't know it. That's what I knew, you know. And so I had all these stories that were false about me, like, oh, I'm not good in a relationship, I don't like people, I'm not lovable. You know, I always wanted to just get away and be by myself. Why was that? It wasn't because of my relational capacities. It was because my brain was just freaking out, because the world as we know it was so overwhelming. And oh my gosh. And so, you know, you deal with that through vestibular input, which is sort of dancing and moving around, spinning, or proprioceptive input, which is weights and push-ups and things like running and such. So I became an ardent runner. Tomorrow for my 50th, I'm going to run the loop, you know, 10 miles, and don't run as much as I used to, given more family obligations now. It just takes time. But that was really, you know, kind of coupled with my deepening faith in Christ, the place where I really started to get traction. And that was, you know, 42, 43. So if anybody's listening to this and, you know, you're mid-30s and you're just feeling like you're just burning rubber and not going anywhere, well, your life's not over yet. You know, there's lots of time on the shot clock, so to speak. And for me, it was in my early 40s that I started to get some traction, started to learn how to take care of myself, started to learn how to improve my relational skills, started to learn how to pray and read the Bible and root myself in that tradition. And since then, every year has been really markedly improved over the previous one.
Yeah, gosh, I can definitely connect to that on so many different levels, especially my 33rd birthday was just a couple weeks ago. So that to me definitely kind of resonates on many different levels. So it's very, very interesting. So let's maybe go down the mindfulness, awareness, presence route, and let's talk about that a little bit more, because it sounds like that's a big component of the work that you've been doing, as far as from Buddhism to the retreats to even now with prayer, still kind of involves a day-to-day awareness, consciousness, way of feeling connected to each other, to everything. So what are your thoughts about that? And for someone that maybe this is something that piques their interest, how would you get somebody like that started, just to kind of start to practice or bring it into their, practice somewhat?
Good question. Rich question. I'm thinking back to 1998. Here I was, framing houses, not sure where I was going in my life. And after work, I was reading a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ. I think that's the title, by Thich Nhat Hanh. And he was my introduction to Buddhism. And in this book, it shared the short prayer that they say before eating a meal. And it's something to the effect of, this food is the gift of the whole universe. The earth, the sky, and much hard work. Let us live in a way that makes us worthy to receive it. May we only take foods that nourish our bodies and that prevent illness. And it goes on. But that first line just had me, because I was like, now there is something that's so true, practical, and yet profound and beautiful. This food is the gift of the whole universe, the earth and the sky, and much hard work. Even the way that you can say that, because I've done a little poetry in my life, and each of like much hard work, 2-3 monosyllabic, words that really drive home the fact that, yeah, food production is hard work. We know that. It's in our past. And so I went on some retreats and started practicing meditation, the whole thing. And now within the Christian tradition, there's a form called centering prayer, which is very equivalent. And so what I would say to folks is to reach out and to find something in the community. I think there's a lot of resources out there now that weren't around in the late 90s. So someone out there is practicing some form of centering prayer, mindfulness, meditation, and link up with them and see, what they're doing and get some mentoring from them. The other thing is that it is very key to go on retreat of some sort, whatever tradition it is. And this morning, I've got a little closet at my house that's just for sitting in. So far, I haven't been able to lure my wife nor any of my kids to try it out themselves. But I was like, hey, it's not my closet. Anybody wants to come sit in this closet, come sit in this closet. It's just a really small closet. There's nothing in it, no bar for hanging clothes or anything. It's just for sitting. Close the door, you're in darkness, you sit down on a little cushion, and you're with yourself, And so those moments are great. This morning and last night I sat for 20 minutes, and because I've been on retreat, I'm able to touch this larger whole, if you will. This is where words sort of fail us, quicker. Because I sort of know the way there, both through my own mind and all of its unique craziness, and every mind has it, as well as just through the practice and of sitting and being silent and still for days on end. And I just don't see how you could cultivate that 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night. You just can't get there. It'd be like saying, okay, you're going to learn to play the piano, but you're only going to practice for 2 minutes and never have recitals. No, you gotta put your time in, So meditation and mindfulness is a practice. That's why they call it that. And you gotta put your time in. And I would say, as a Christian now, that the same is true for prayer. Your relationship with God is an investment. It takes time. It takes fumbling around, but over time, that connection that you create makes it easier to get there in the future, and also richer. And I was just motivated out of sheer necessity, because the normal things of life didn't really fill me up like it seemed they did other people. So that was my motivation.
Yeah, I can understand that. And to the point of finding someone, a mentor, a coach, somebody that could help, how how would how would you suggest somebody even begin to kind of search and seek someone that may be able to help?
It's a good question. And I think it really gets to the question of community as well. Because certainly that point person is key. So in the tradition I was in Buddhism, it was my teacher, Eileen Kiera, lovely saint of a bodhisattva, as we would say in Buddhism, of a woman. In the Christian tradition, it would be maybe a pastor or a real wise elder, someone that's down the court a good ways and can help you along. But both of those are in the context of larger communities. And so I would say have some discernment about those communities, but also don't spend your whole life kicking tires. Sometimes you just got to get in there and get to know folks, make a commitment, right? Because, rushing in and also never making a commitment are equally dangerous.
Yeah.
So get to know a community, have a sense of, is there some fruit here? Is there a sense of presence that my heart resonates with? If so, okay. Take a next step, meet with the leader or leaders of that community and be upfront with them. We need leaders of our souls. That's the bottom line. Is this notion that spiritual growth is just up to us and we're just out there as free agents. Hogwash. Like, what else do we do in life where we're just free agents and learn from ourselves? Nothing, We need a basketball coach, piano teacher, cello teacher, public speaking teacher. Clearly we need a teacher for our soul. And so that's what they're there for. And really what they're doing is giving you a taste of the unconditional love that is out there. That you are loved, you are cherished, you are made uniquely and perfectly with all your warts, just as you are. And that needs to come through face to face. You can read it in a book, sort of, but really it's relational.
Yeah, that makes me think of, as far as abundance and giving, and I think you talk about kind of giving with an open hand and thinking and having an abundance mindset. And can you expand on that and what has been your experience to that end?
That's a good question, and I'll just say that as I've grown older, both physically and I hope spiritually, I've, through the help of these teachers, like I speak of, and some of them I do read in books or listen to them on sermon podcasts, so they're not always sitting across the table from me. I've come to identify just how much I was calibrated around performance in certain areas of my life, and that was my God, if you will. Like, I'm okay if I can perform. I'm okay if I am meeting expectations or exceeding expectations in this professional arena or in this personal arena. But it was all about me and how I was doing to the other person on the other side. And so that is something that I have continued to work with. And I'll get to your thread on abundance, but I've just continued to surrender, really, because I can't do it on my own. Just surrender to Christ and just say, hey, I need some help here, because I continue to get up every morning and think that my worth is related to how I perform in this world. It's such an old story, and you've shown me in your behavior and in your writings that that's not true. And I know that's not true. And so that's an evolution, I would say, that I'm continuing to journey on. It relates to abundance because maybe just by default, we're born into these bodies, we look around, we see somebody with some cool tennis shoes, we want some cool tennis shoes, cool car, cool house, cool job, whatever it is, right? We have eyes that wander and start to covet, and we want that. And so we figure out some way to get that. And okay, to get those tennis shoes, you know, they're $70 and I got to go do this to do that. And this whole matrix starts to build in our brain. And I only get the tennis shoes if I get this money, right? And so there's this kind of transactional structure there. And the tennis shoes are related to my worth, right, on some level. And so you can see that, well, gosh, if I don't have this over here in terms of dollars to get those tennis shoes, and if I don't have the tennis shoes, then I'm not going to feel good about myself. I mean, I'm sort of speaking rather kind of generally here and crudely, but you kind of see my point. Then things are going to start to fall apart. And so I don't know if I ever consciously made a shift towards a different type of mindset, but it's almost as if I destructed that whole transactional linkage, so that if we are loved and cherished and held and viewed and seen and accepted just for who we are, our pure naked selves, then it doesn't really matter if we have the tennis shoes. And if it doesn't really matter if we have the tennis shoes, then it doesn't really matter if I have the $70 to buy the tennis shoes with. There's like so much less pressure. It's like, wow, I can just breathe, you know, I'm feeling better already, you know? And so the abundance sort of mindset is this notion that you hold things very gently in your palm, knowing that I don't need it, A, as I've just kind of described here, and B, I will be provided for. There's more out there where that came from. And there's several, I don't know my Bible well enough to quote verse, but several lines where it's just like, you little simpleton, like, look at all these birds and grasses and such that I take care of out there. Don't you think I'm going to take care of you, 10 times better? Right? That's effectively the paraphrase. And so you just kind of let that in, and you let go of whatever cultural framework you may have inherited or bought into or whatnot. And it's not easy, I just learned the other day that there's a gift coming my way, and I was watching my hands mentally kind of grasp around it, and I was like, wait a minute, Evans, no, you've decided to give a certain percentage of everything that comes into your world to your giving fund, and then from there to the church or other people that are in need, whatnot. So, okay, yeah. So that's all to say, I still have to practice it, but that, just to kind of put a bookend on that, is a great practice that, the anecdote of greed is generosity. And so the more we practice generosity, the more we embody this abundance mindset, and the more we feel rich. We do, literally, quite rich. And so I have always liked to talk to people about just, hey, do you have a giving fund? Do you have, like, even if it's like $2 that you put aside out of whatever amount of money, just set up a giving fund. And every dollar that comes in, give some portion of it to that fund, and you will start to feel rich. It whatever the spectrum of income you're at, it'll happen. So that's a fun one. Yeah.
I'm starting, and I don't know if there is a connection, but two things popped into my head. As far as the physiology of doing it, and then it kind of starts to create the psychology or the thinking of it, as far as the giving, just by simply doing it. You over time begin to develop the psychology. I think a lot of people wait to feel or to think it and then start doing it.
Yep.
And that kind of makes me think of you and, back to relationship and how it was your bodily structure. I forget the phrase or the words that you use, but it was actually your body that was kind of preventing or causing this sort of kind of psychology. So these two things are interconnected in one form or another. I don't know if you want to just respond to that.
What comes to my mind, Jessi, is this beautiful metaphor, and I think I first heard it from Rumi, the Sufi poet, and it's basically that we are a string on a lute, a guitar, basically, and we want to be tuned not too loose, right? Because you can't really play a string if it's too loose, but not too tight either, right? Because if it's too tight, you're just way sharp, to use a musical term. So, towards your point, yes, there is a place where prescriptive action, I am going to do this for this period of time to cultivate this new habit, is a good thing, because it's basically sort of tightening the string, so to speak. It's a practice, right? There's also people where they love to practice. I love to practice, right? So I'm usually too tight rather than too loose, right?
Okay.
Other personality types are probably too loose, And so it's a balance there. Certainly there's times to take on a practice and say, yes, I'd like to just try, giving 10% of my income for the next 6 months and see what happens and how I feel. And then other times where, you could just make another practice that's like, I vow to do every generous act that crosses my mind, right? Calling someone to say, hey, that was a really great thing that you did. Writing them a note, say, hey, I'm sorry about that. My bad, or whatever, you're compelled to do. So, having traveled down many paths of trying too hard, as the fellow with the string that's too tight, I approach prescriptions with some level of cautiousness, but it is very important to do that, because you don't learn to play the piano just by thinking about it. You got to practice. So.
Yep. Yeah, got to take action.
Yes.
That makes me think to go on self-awareness. You kind of touched on how you started to discover, like, oh, wow, I kind of like this sort of thing, or I kind of enjoy this sort of thing, or wow, I'm actually kind of good at communication or marketing or video, whatever the case may be. How did you go about becoming more self-aware, even just being too tight or too loose? And is there a way that we can maybe practice that and becoming more self-aware? Is it through journaling? Is it just asking others? What kind of sort of best practices for self-awareness? Because I think self-awareness plays a huge part in kind of being or starting on the path of being somewhat successful at, in the sense of getting what we are trying to do.
Well, then your question has answers on two fronts. One, kind of a professional sense. How am I aware of my gifts and how do I employ them? And then on a personal front of, how am I aware of my physiology and psychology, and how do I, go into the playing court of life every day and in my optimum form for giving to others. I think on the personal front, journaling is a great practice. Taking in good spiritual food. I read the Bible every day is a great practice. Being in community with people that you are seen by and that see you is a great practice. prayer or meditation is a very great practice. We need that more than ever, I think. So I would just, on the personal side, encourage people to think of it as a diet, really. And just like we know that we need some protein, we need some roughage, we need, some fruits and vegetables and carbohydrates, etc. I'm kind of mixing those food types there, but the point is, you need a balanced diet, and the same is true if we're thinking a bit more holistically about ourselves. And, and I know, you're on that journey yourself, so it may be an answer that other people have different answers too. But that's what I would say for the personal side. And then on the professional side, you're referencing the fact that I graduated in this field of engineering and then later discovered, wow, I am actually good enough to shoot and edit video that something gets shown on PBS. Like, who knew, right? Or I actually can write a pretty decent poem. I mean, I'm not like academic quality, but certainly create these pieces of beauty that move people. Or I can get up in front of people and speak, and like, where'd that come from? And so a lot of that was just getting out in life and trying things. And I think not being afraid to fail, not being afraid to make a mistake, just trying something and giving it your best and your all and seeing what happens. And that's a process, and it takes some time. I'll tell you some things that I'm more self-aware now. So as you know, and many listeners will, my mom, Senator Lynn Evans Parlett, right? Pretty renowned chunk of time in the legislature and especially the Senate. And, a few years ago I was coming up and I'd led a successful campaign for the hospital in Chelan and a few other things. And, you're the son of a politician, maybe you're a politician. And I thought, well, maybe so, But guess what? I don't really like to talk to people. That part of me that just still needs quiet, it's still there. I need to run and write and create things and be, sort of creative. And then when needed, pick up the phone or talk to people. And so I realized, Evans, a lot of politics is not done when you're sitting at the table. It's done after the meeting. It's done before the meeting. It's done when you pick up the phone. It's relational stuff. That is not my path, And so I've learned that, like I say, just most recently. So bottom line is that this process goes on for a long time. And, just kind of have some fun with it. Kind of be led by your curiosity and make notes along the way. And just trust that you are here for some purpose. And it's a mystery at many turns what that is. And it's confounding in its mysteriousness, but to have faith in that belief that more will be revealed, because it will.
That is very, very well put. And gosh, I want to go so many different ways with that, but I'll try to stay more focused on which part we want to go to, where we want to go to next, because there was definitely so many different parts that I wanted to talk to you about. And I think the more you talk a lot about curiosity and just kind of scratching your own itch and just kind of just always being kind of curious. Is that what kind of led you down the path of starting with video and starting with being more of a creative type, was by scratching your own itch and just kind of being creative? And my own personal experience has been through fear. Like, fear of doing it wrong or doing a bad job or even doing my best and have that not even be good enough yet. Did you deal with any sense of that, or did you experience, what emotions did you feel in the beginning when you were starting or beginning to explore your curiosities?
In the beginning, I still feel them, man. I've got things going on professionally now where I'm just like, oh my gosh, Evans, if they only knew just how half-baked your brain was here, like what the heck, you know? So that never goes away. Like we are always encumbered by this self-conscious fear thing, and it doesn't go away. Sometimes it can direct you towards healthy risk-taking. So I'm not saying don't pay attention to fear, but in my experience, we give the voice too much weight. And, you know, there's that quote by Marianne Williamson, I think, you know, we're not afraid of our darkness, we're afraid of our light, you know. We're afraid of what would happen if we really shined greatly. And I still am. So that's an ongoing journey for each one of us of A, you know, how can I discern my light? And B, how can I give this light and share it? Because sharing light is not without consequence. I'm just thinking of the most prototypical example of Jesus, right? He died, was resurrected, but he died. Not fun. And anyone that does any kind of service, you know, you die. I led this big hospital campaign in 2017 I mentioned, and you know, people shoot arrows at you, you die. So, but to let go of, you know, that small self and to just kind of go back, you know, to that notion earlier of I'm larger, there's more abundance, I'm being supported. That's key. Being around other people that are having fun in life and taking risks, that's key. We are not isolated. I'm listening to this great PBS documentary on Hemingway right now. Ken Burns did it. You know, he went to Paris in his 20s, and he was around Gertrude Stein and several other people I'm forgetting their names of now, but it was this community that he was brought into as a young writer, and that, you know, was just kind of the ecosystem that he was a part of. So I love the quote by Helen Keller. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. So I often ask, well, I wouldn't say I ask myself this question, but I would ask everyone listening to this to ask the question, is your life a daring adventure? Do you feel like it would live up to that? Is it a daring adventure? And I'm not saying be stupid and go do something that you're not physically or mentally capable of doing, but are you taking risks? Is it a daring adventure? It should be. That's what we are here for. So that's the first litmus. And if the answer is no, then wake up the next morning and say, what can I do to make my life a daring adventure? Now, that said, sometimes we get into periods where we've just had our wings clipped, so to speak, where something hasn't gone right. I'm thinking of the Dr. Seuss book, you know, Oh, the Places You'll Go. I don't know if you ever read that. And there's that section where he says, except when it doesn't, except when you won't, you know, and it's all dark and gloomy and everyone's racing ahead and you're all alone and things aren't going as well as you had hoped. So there's those seasons and they teach you things. That was really, you know, 2011, 12, 13, 14, divorce number 2, that was the season for me. It's like, okay, Lord, my wings are clipped. I want to learn. Like, I'm listening. I want to learn from that. And so there's value in that. At that point, for me to just like, yeah, what's the next daring adventure? Like, no, that's not the right time for that season of life. So please understand there's a little bit of both. But don't live in that place forever. You know, Dr. Seuss's book doesn't end there. No, you move through that. That's the dark night of the soul that teaches you things, and you come out the other side wiser and more strategic and more joy-filled, even in the face of uncertainty. And so for me, you know, it was in 2019, and I was listening to a podcast, and the question was, what would you do if you were brave? And I was listening to this, Michael Hyatt, great resource for anybody looking to get more strategic in their life. What would you do if you're brave? Instantly, the voice in my head said, Guy, you'd go on a date. And I just like, oh. And I knew it in an instant, like, that's what I would do. And I divorced second time, 2013. Had been just celibate and single and just happy, like, no drama, working, rebuilding my life, nothing, no dating. So it's 2019. I'd go on a date. And that's where, if I didn't really believe in life as a daring adventure, I might have said, oh, well, I can't do that because of my past, or, oh, well, it's not the right time, or, oh, well, whatever, right? No. You get the call, Guy, you go on a date, you answer it. So I went home, it was a Friday, went home that night, got on a couple dating sites, created some profiles, felt terribly self-conscious, terribly scared, right? Because I'm like a 47-year-old man at that point, and what do I know? And it was not the greatest next couple of months, not greatly successful. Had one lovely young person, probably too young for me, that I was pinging on this dating site saying, I'm not interested in a relationship, but I think I heard you play the piano once, and that was really great ministry. Keep it up, So some interesting things. But then I'm talking to a friend, and Rufus Woods, who we know, and I was like, Rufus, I'm dating, right? And because I had said, okay, I'll follow that. Okay, I'll get on these dating sites. Okay, I'll start to tell some friends I'm dating. His brain was like, oh, never thought of it, but you really need to meet a friend of mine, right? And month later, I met my current wife. And it was really, many forces at play there, obviously. Mm-hmm. But going back to the triggering point, it was just my willingness to say okay to something that was scary. And that's something I've practiced over life. It was just like, what's the worst that could happen, right? Like, people won't like me. Well, I'm fine. I'm fine by myself. I won't have any food. Well, kind of hard to starve in this country. Family will think I'm a failure. Oh, I went through that in my 20s, right? Like what is it, right? Like, die? Oh, Jesus proved that. No, you're going to resurrect. That's solved too. So you kind of have to make these mental tricks in your brain to find the courage sometimes. But the sweetness, it makes life very deep.
I like that. And it seems like these beliefs, you hold them very close. And that's you kind of seem to go back to those. And those are the beliefs that give you courage. Would that be, is that close to, is that kind of how you went back to it? That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. Not that I would consciously think of them as beliefs, but just more, just rhythms in life. And I was blessed to have a childhood where I was given a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different things. And so I grew up just learning that I could try things, and I've got a fair set of skills, so that helps too. But I love this vision. There's a poem by Gibran in his book, The Prophet, on good and evil. And the poem itself is much bigger than this thread, so I won't go into that. But he uses this phrase, your giant self. And I love that idea that there's a giant self that's waiting out there for each of us. And we're not going to meet him while we sit on the couch and watch the TV. We find him when we get up and we go out in the cold or the hot or whatever it is out there, or we go into the crowd, or we make the phone call, or we apply to the school, or whatever it is, go on a date. Mm-hmm. that's where we find our giant self. And my dad and my mom have both been good role models there. Not, again, consciously, they didn't talk about it, but just doing stuff in life. Just, it's like, okay, this is what you do in life. You get out there and you get involved civically, and you be creative in business, and you try again when you fail relationally, so that's, I guess, kind of how I've operated.
Mm-hmm. That's great. As you, tomorrow being your 50th birthday, what's going through your mind? What are you reflecting on? What do you feel you've learned so much already up to this point, and it seems that you're very reflective. It's a good kind of checkpoint for not only you, but I think a lot of people. That kind of 50 is, I think, hits people very differently, as well as 30 and 40 and kind of these kind of mile markers, or you should have had kids by now, or should have a house, or married, whatever the case may be, the ideal scenario. Regardless, it's a good time to kind of be like, what have you done? What has gone well, and where could you have done differently? What's on your mind now?
Yes, good question. Well, and your comment about the shoulds is an interesting one, and I would say, and I'll just use the Christian terminology because that's the worldview I live in. But as you know, the Trinity is made up of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and it's this sort of mysterious triune relationship where they are all kind of serving and giving to the other. The Holy Spirit we were given after Christ's resurrection. He's like, hey, I'm leaving now, but I'm going to leave you with a helper. And the Holy Spirit came, and the Holy Spirit enters your body when you're baptized. And so for me, that's not just an abstract concept. That is a force that I practice listening to, and that's what I do in this closet I mentioned when I'm still and quiet, because the Spirit typically needs some quiet to speak to you. And so I guess what I'm so grateful for is that I have that relationship that's well established and that has guided me for several seasons of life now. And that gives me really a sense of trust in the future. Like, I don't really have to worry about where I go because the Spirit's going to lead me. And nor do I need to second guess myself about where I am right now, because this is where I am, and unless I'm hearing otherwise, this is where I'm supposed to be. But again, that requires getting out of ourselves and the voices in our heads, and consciously thinking of this relationship with the Spirit as I'm talking about it right now. And I would encourage everyone to cultivate that relationship. Jesus talks about, don't store up treasures on earth, because they're just going to get eaten by moths and stolen away by the next round of bandits. But instead, invest in spiritual treasures, essentially, because you'll have those for eternity. And that's probably the thing I'm so grateful for at 50, is just a sense of peace that relationship is there. And it's not even there just with me and the Holy Spirit, but it's there with my lovely wife, who's a Jesus follower, and this band of Jesus followers at Trinity Church, which is this great community, and my former church in Chelan. And it's like this community of people. And it's not to say that I'm not afraid of the future, climate change, institutional collapse. There's big issues that are facing us, some of which could be pretty bad to live through, will be bad, most likely, to live through. But that sense of like, I'm there with the Spirit, and He's going to tell me what to do next, or it or she, whatever pronoun. That's a here and now certainty. There's this great passage, I think it's in Matthew, I don't know, where Jesus says, hey, y'all, when you're up in front of the crowd and getting accused for something, don't be worried about saying anything. Like, the Spirit's going to tell you what to say. And it's so freeing, You don't have to practice. Just it's gonna come. You're gonna know what to say. You're gonna know what to do. So as I turn 50, there's this like, okay, yeah. And I look to my past, and as I said, the 40s were a decade of traction, and 30s and 20s not so, but lots of learning, painful and such. So friend was joking with me on a text like, oh, you're turning 25, right? And I joked back, yeah, 25. But really, no, I do not want to be 25. Lord have mercy, right? I'm grateful to be 50. And my grandma, who's passed away now, but she said, Guy, my life really started to get sweet when I turned 50. And so, if anything, I'm looking forward to the next half of this life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really good to hear, and I'm excited too, because I'm still, per se, you're 50% to 100. I'm at 33% still.
Yeah.
It's interesting to kind of have a reflection point there.
And one thing I had heard, Jessi, in a men's context, and I don't know, it may apply for women as well, but this was a gentleman talking about his wisdom, age 65, looking back on his life and other things that he had read and brought together. And he said, stages of a fella's life are this. In your 20s, it's a period of preparation where you're learning about yourself, you're gathering in things, and this is kind of in the context of going out in the world. Your 30s are where you're in initiation. You're out there and you've actually got some responsibility and some mentors pouring into you and some challenges, and you're getting initiated by the world. And your 40s and your 50s are the periods of domination. You have like serious strength, and you're using it well and wisely, and you're a force, and that's where you need to be. And then in 60s and 70s, it's a period of integration where you're taking in your wisdom and carrying it back and giving it to those in the 30s or 20s perhaps, or perhaps 40s and 50s, but you're kind of packaging it all up and trying to find some, final place for it. So, I'd just say, hey, you're probably right there in that initiating 30s, and it's not fun all the time.
Yeah.
My initiation was on the farm working with my dad in my 30s, and hard work, but he taught me a lot, and you can see like, oh, that's how you behave in this situation. Interesting. Or, wow, you came to work even when you had a cold and you're feeling that bad? Okay. I mean, maybe not advisable in an office setting, right? But outdoor on a farm, you got to get the work done.
Oh, for sure.
So, yeah, there's a lot of richness there at each chapter, but I'm happy to be in this a little richer and sweeter chapter than earlier ones.
Yeah, it's interesting, our relationship with time. It's really hard, I figured like the younger that I am, it's harder to put into perspective, like, oh, how long life is and can be, depending on how we treat it and what we do with it, and living that brave, courageous life, I think, is an important piece of that. Or else I feel like maybe it kind of drags on if you're kind of living that Monday through Friday, wishing every day it was the weekend per se. And I think maybe it's easy to get caught up in the whole cycle too. So
very much so.
I kind of think about that too.
Very much so. And I think different cultures exist out there where yeah, that's the whole paradigm. And I just thought, oh, why would I be more thankful on Friday than I am on Monday? I love Mondays, right? You're fresh, you get this week ahead of you to just lean into work, you know. And I love Fridays because you can have some good tequila and relax, you know. And that gets to this notion of what is my calling, what is my work, what is my approach to work, how do I find something I enjoy, what structures are healthy and life-giving for humans to work in professionally. Those are bigger topics than I probably have knowledge to speak on, but I will say that I am biased just from my own childhood past and family tradition and my present reality towards small-scale entrepreneurism. You know, that's where life is fun and exciting and on the edge, and it's like, you know, Hans Sawyer, you know, Luke Skywalker, you know, you're just like making stuff up as you go, and yeah, you can totally biff it, but you're alive and you know it. There's some excitement there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
100%. So as we kind of close up, any parting words or kind of suggestions or ideas on what you would give somebody who may be going through their winter right now? And, you know, last year it was kind of tough in many different ways for all of us. What would be something that either has helped you during those times that you have, you know, a little bit of experience under your belt now, and you've had your fair share? What would you recommend to kind of clear up some of this mud and just kind of figure out, be like, how can I make my situation a little bit better, improve just a little bit more today, or get myself at least a little bit on the right track, just one step, one tiny step that it doesn't feel like it's too much or not too overwhelming. Your life isn't going to change overnight. There's no silver bullet, but there could be just a little nugget, just a little piece. What comes to mind?
What comes to mind is some good wisdom that I came to in the artist way decades ago now, and it still comes up to me sometimes. Julia Cameron, the author there, had one of her rules, and there was like several rules for the artist way, and it was set small and achievable goals and do them. Set small goals and achieve them, basically. Emphasis on small and achievement, just and bite size. And the reason I think of that now is because I remember what a North Star that was for me. Because as I mentioned, in my 20s, you know, I just kind of taken the normal being too tight of my lute string and had just completely loosened it. Like I was just loose, and bad habits, and, you know, working for $10, you know, building houses, which is a great job and an awesome profession, and I learned a ton from those carpenters, but wasn't life-giving to me, and it was hard every day, and just serious doubts about my life and where was I going, and you know, I would have anxiety, and I would overeat to sort of make the anxiety go away, and then I'd get self-recriminating about that and kind of beat myself up, and it was just like really dark winter. And I remember that line, set small goals and achieve them. And that's what I did, bit by bit, you know. And that's what I would say is, if you're in a tough season of life right now, set some small goal. Get some exercise. That's helpful. You know, just a good walk or get your cardio up in some way. That's really helpful. And if you can't imagine doing 25 to 30 minutes, do 15. If you can't imagine 15, just do 10, you know. Just keep ramping it down until you get some wins. And then community, I spoke of that earlier. I just was such a lone wolf back then, and so lost in my own self-consciousness that I didn't know how to reach out to others. And so, you know, if that's you, I would just say, look for one person that is holding a hand out. And when it comes, just grab onto it, even if it scares you, and trust that there's goodwill there to be had on the other part. And hopefully you'll find yourself in a circle of some sort, where you can be heard and you can listen, and people can help you be accountable to those small goals that you set. And for me, I would just say, get to know Jesus. You don't have to believe the Bible. You don't have to call yourself a Christian, but just learn more about him. It's an interesting chap. There's a lot of good stuff in there. You could read the Gospel of John as a starter, or learn about Paul. He's an interesting guy too. Andy Stanley, North Point Ministries, is a fellow I listened to for a long time. Great resource. Tim Keller with his church in New York is who I listen to these days a lot online. Another great resource. But get to know that story, because at the bedrock of all of that is what we all long to hear, which is, I'm loved, I'm accepted, I'm good, just who I am in this broken, dark, cold winter of a season that I find myself in. Even in this place, especially in this place, I'm loved. And if you can take that in, it warms the soul.
That's so well put. Well, Guy, this has been incredible and very fitting for me. I know I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was very selfish with my questions too, just because those are things that I'm naturally curious about. So thank you for sharing some of your experience, your story. I think not only but I think I'm sure people listening to this will be able to resonate with that in many different ways. So thank you for being vulnerable, for being courageous. And I think that I think we need more of that. And I think us sharing it, I think we build that community one conversation at a time through relationship. So I want to commend you for that and recognize that. And I'm very, very glad to get to know you a little bit better too.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah.